Thank you for attending Webinar Wednesday. Today you'll be hearing from our partners from Experticity, and the title will be The Evolution of Influencer Marketing. Experticity has been working closely with IHA for the past 3 years, and they've been actively sponsoring IHA's annual chess event. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Senior Vice President of Marketing of Experticity, Inga Johnson. Inga?
Thank you. Really appreciate the time to chat, and lucky or unlucky for the people attending, this is a topic that I am incredibly passionate about, so I love any opportunity to talk about what our company is seeing in the marketplace. We work with about 600 consumer brands at the moment, and the one uniting feature of all those brands are trying to figure out who are the people whose opinions really matter. Clearly there are a group of individuals that are impacting what consumers are buying, and as a brand it's always been incredibly tricky to figure out how do you connect with them, and then how do you connect in a way that you get an authentic recommendation. And the space is changing at an incredibly fast rate, so it's important that all of us keep an eye on what the trends are and missteps so that we can make sure that for our own brand, how our brand is being defined is correctly interpreted all the way to the consumer by the people around them. My background is I head up marketing here. Before this, I worked at both Columbia Sportswear and Ancestry.com, all incredibly data-driven companies, and a real passion there about understanding how the end consumer can have a great recommendation about our brand. And I'm really excited to be here at Experticity and figuring out how it is that we build a company that's incredibly data-driven in this space. So let me go ahead and jump in and set the stage with what we hear, and I'm guessing it's the conversations your brands are having. You know, it's over 600 brands. The one thing that is consistent is that the buying experience consumers are facing is changing. Commerce is changing, and it's changing at an incredibly rapid rate in terms of all the buzzwords around omni-channel and consumer expectations. It's hard for a brand to always keep up on this. And what we often say is, like, put yourself in the starting point for any conversation about influences, put yourself in the steps or the foot of the consumer, right? And think about their buying experience. And generally it starts here. The average consumer today has more options than ever about what to buy, and that's true in every single category that's out there. If you just think about one niche shopping, not niche, but one shop destination on the web, Amazon, 200 million individual SKUs found in that just single destination. We have brands that have more SKUs in their network now than the entire category had just a few years ago. I think you can all relate to our own buying experiences. Last week I just wanted a very simple task of, I think I need to get a toilet brush, and I went to Amazon. 1,600 different options against that one purchase. And of course it isn't just the options and the SKUs that are shown. Every single one of those pieces comes with its own set of reviews, their own brand websites, their own social outreach. Consumers are overwhelmed on every level about what it is to buy and are asking for what are the types of credible recommendations to help them make that decision. It's not a big leap to assume that with all that wealth of information, that the quality of that information gets called into question. I mean, after all, if there's 100 reviews and all those reviews keep averaging to 3.5 on every purchase, is that any more helpful than no reviews at all? In fact, consumers are actively seeking the right information to help them make the decision. The average consumer now checks 10.4 different touch points prior to a purchase, and that's doubled in the last 5 years. It tells us that the consumers really are looking for advice about what is the best thing to buy. The other thing that consumers are being pretty clear about is they don't view us, the marketers of the world, as that credible source and recommendation. Ad Age did this interesting poll against 10,000 consumers and found that only 4% believe that marketers act with integrity, we scored less than the politicians in the world. And I think that obviously with all this information, we would hope that the consumer would see we're trying to help them with that buying decision, but that's not how they're interpreting it. And the other challenge is obviously there are marketers out there in our space having very public missteps that are eroding that sense of trust even further. I mean, take the world of celebrity endorsements. You know, years ago, that was the go-to playbook. If you wanted someone who seemed credible talking about your product, the go-to was to go and find a celebrity. But recent studies have found that that's actually plummeted in terms of vehicles that consumers trust. And it's because they see things like this. I mean, it's doubtful that any consumer out there believed that BlackBerry was cool just because Alicia Keys had signed on as their creative director. Especially not when just a few months into the relationship she was caught tweeting from her iPhone, and certainly not a year into the relationship when they parted ways. And of course, why Kia would love for consumers to believe that this is what he drives from his mansion every morning, his own social media tells a very different story about the cars that he would recommend in the buying conversation. So what does all this mean for marketers? Well, there are a number of studies that are all echoing this new trend of how consumers absorb information as it relates to the buying decision. The one that I'm going to highlight is from McKinsey. I like it because it's one of the most robust. 20,000 consumers on a global basis were taken into this study. And what they're trying to figure out is, what is the role of determining what it is they're going to buy? And I think years ago, all of us in marketing built these really clean funnels on a board, assuming like, okay, starts in the beginning, we do a TV ad, and then they have awareness, and then they wait to get a magazine from us, and then they move into consideration. Maybe they get an email from us, and they move to purchase. We send them a coupon after the fact, and now they're an advocate. But clearly, consumers don't sit back anymore and wait for marketing-triggered messages to move them through the funnel. Their study showed 3 different data sets that they identified. The first is called initial consideration. Something has happened. The weather has changed. You went over to your friend's house and saw them cooking this amazing soup. You visited a restaurant. Something in your world has put you down the path of what you're about to purchase. And it turns out the advertising that you're doing does impact the brands that they start that purchase on. So 67% of what influences the brands that they start their journey on is either advertising or their past experience. But what the research identified that was new is that once they move into active purchasing, not just thinking about the category of the brands, but what knife exactly is right for me, they actively move away from brand-led advertising. And then instead, primarily look at consumer-driven opinions that they can find on their own terms and on their own time. And the other thing that's really interesting is that the moment of purchase still is an impactful part of the final mile that's up for play. So this research said that despite extensive research, 40% of the people will change their mind based on something they see, hear, or interact with at the point of sale. So that brand-led advertising, although driving the bulk of the influence at the top, by the time you get to the moment of purchase, it's influencing less than 22% of that final purchase. And those independent, trusted recommendations they sought out on their own and the point of sale are making the bulk of what the actual buying decision is. So often when we talk to the brands, it is that frustration that like, hey, I'm spending money on advertising. I understand that's driving a lot of top-of-funnel activity. But once they get in the store, they're talking to their friends, they could easily turn from, hey, I think I just want cookware to actually this brand is what I would recommend. And losing that final mile is really painful. And ultimately, this idea of trusted recommendations both at the point of sale and further in the funnel is a part that our company has really spent a lot of time thinking about. It's clear that trusted recommendations are coming from people. An online review is left from a person. The people they seek out in their network is a person. Retail, whether they're looking for online chat or in the store itself, are people. And it makes a compelling case that brands need to think about how do they add this to their marketing mix. So they're not just focusing at top of the funnel, but how are they actually impacting conversion? And when we sit with brands, we often find that people are doing this, and they may have different names for it. They may call it their brand advocate program, or they may call it their influencer marketing. There's a lot of names for it that haven't really fully sunk into a single trend in the industry, but the intent is similar. And when I talk to brands, there's often some common mistakes that brands make when they think about how to implement this in their company. And I want to share a couple of those, so if you're thinking about how to approach the space, you can avoid these as well. I'd say this is probably the first. When people think about influence, it's easiest to think back to the celebrity model, right? That it's really about fame and reach. How many people can that one person touch? And that is an important metric, but it isn't the only metric. It doesn't take into account what is that person's credibility, what is their influence, what's their proximity to the buyer or the buying decision. And I think the other thing that has faults when you just start with the reach model is similar to the celebrity model. Trust in this is hard. People are now very skeptical when they see a blogger or a celebrity endorse a product. They know it's an opinion for hire. In fact, as many of you that have probably played in this space know, the FTC has gotten involved in this space because there's been so many public missteps of people not disclosing their relationship with the brand and instead endorsing a product, and only after their followers or their fans find out about the disclosure that they feel that they were misled, right? That it's not an authentic recommendation. The other fact is that according to this study, which I love, coming from the social website mentioned, they looked at over 1 billion social activities in the last 2 years. 91% of those mentions come from people that have fewer than 500 followers. And it's not a big leap of faith to say that some of these influencers, some of these people may be influencers, right? That they may be incredibly passionate about the category. And if you're only thinking about reach, you might miss them when you're thinking about what's important for your brand. I really love this quote. Influence is not about the number of followers or a clout score. Many times it's someone who might fly beneath the radar. It really does point out that influence is more nuanced than just reach. I'd say the second point seems obvious, but we have a lot of discussion with individuals about that. And that is this idea that social is equivalent to influence, or that only online conversations count. And it's clear to all of us that offline conversations have an incredible impact on your brand. It can just be more difficult to measure, and so a lot of individuals tend to leave it out of their strategy. There was a recent study this fall performed by Keller Fay. We worked with them on past projects. I'm a big fan. And this one really was a landmark study. It tried to find industry-wide information about what is the value of a conversation. And they found that word of mouth is driving about 13% of consumer sales. That's roughly $6 trillion in annual consumer spending. And in their view, social is broken down to about 2/3 of those conversations happening offline and 1/3 happening online. And they also found that there's a different weight of those conversations. This is an ambitious stat, and I'm sure it'll be a source of discussion for a few years. But the thing I find interesting is the focus on the outcome, which is a huge element that I make the argument for. When word of mouth is tied to sales, how does that start to change your strategy? So you can see here the value of the offline versus online impression. They also found that 80% of your best word of mouth will come from your top influencers, roughly the top 20% in your cohort. And their commitment to your brand deserves special recognition and attention, which is why I love this line. It's not about focusing on social media as a channel. It's how do you figure out who are your brand's social consumers. I mean, I think the best advice I give any brand is to move out of the overall channel mix and instead map out your consumer's buying journey. Where it is they start that journey, who would they reach out to or look to in terms of opinions that would matter for them, and where do they end that journey? Where are they likely to buy, and how can you influence that final mile at the point of sale? I often say, not that celebrity is bad for your marketing mix, it should definitely be in there, and not that social is bad, but can you figure out what is the more authentic recommender and add that person to the mix? I tend to call them the everyday expert. I'm sure you might have different terms within your company, but the idea is, who is the person that's looked at with a different set of credibility? Who is close to the buying decision? Someone that is incredibly passionate and knowledgeable and trusted, whose just genuine interest in the category is going to impact their recommendation. That it doesn't take a big leap of faith to think, hey, if this was, for instance, this girl, let's give her name Sally, she worked in retail, you would look to her for a recommendation about what to buy, and you would look to her if she was your friend, not just when she was working, but out when she's out in the in her peer network as well. And we often ask these individuals to help quantify this, and we find that most individuals at retail are having 40+ conversations every single week about what to buy, and that becomes a really interesting media channel for you to tap into. What's more interesting on top of that is they're having those same number of conversations outside of work, right? They're sought out as a trusted recommender of what products to buy. The same may be true for an individual that is more of an aspirational figure. We ask them always the same questions. Are you sought out for your opinion? 89% will say yes, they're sought out daily for their opinion. How many buying conversations are you having? And so you're getting this theme, right, that's not about, hey, I'm a blogger and I have this much reach. Those people obviously could be in the mix too. But these individuals are not just adding content. They're impacting what it is that consumers are buying. Now, this is another thing that I think people struggle with when they start to put this type of channel into their marketing mix. The thing that makes them so great for the brand, or so great for the consumer, makes it more difficult for the brand. You can't just buy their opinion, right? You can't find this influencer who works in retail and is also, you know, heading up the cooking clubs on the weekend and just say, hey, I would like you to talk about my brand more. It doesn't work that way. You have to win them over. And the things that make them influential in their peer group provide real opportunities for you as a brand to connect with them. Content, real insider content about trends, about your product, things that would help them keep that status in their group of being in the know. And of course, trying out products or the ability to comment on products are incredibly powerful. What I'm showing on the screen right now is a methodology that we use. There's many out there that might make sense for your business. But this is called the SAPS model. And what it's basically saying is a lot of times people just look at stuff, which is the bottom piece. Like, what can I just give people and therefore they will like me? This lays out a more of a continuum of what are the ways that you can connect with an individual so that they can be more connected and give a more authentic recommendation for your brand. And these are the things that if you can put time into are actually less cost in terms of maybe a budget line item, more cost in terms of maybe time within your company. But it's things like status. If there's someone who's really impactful and really into your brand, is there something that you can give them that indicates to their peer group that they have reached a different relationship with that brand? On the sporting goods side, a good example of this is we work with a company called Oakley, and they created a brand certification program. And when you would certify, you would get swag that would indicate that you had reached this special status with stuff that they could share socially. It was a t-shirt. And now I do not recommend this for all our brands, but they sent us a picture of an individual who had actually tattooed that status symbol onto his hand. Now, to be clear, he had lots of tattoos, so he'd made a series of bad decisions. But the fact that they had found a nerve to say to that person and give him a visual cue, like, hey, I'm important to this brand and they're important to me, became a really interesting theme that they've expanded on over the years. We've seen similar work in beauty and automotive. This theme of people really wanting to be recognized as a brand is very common. Access is this idea like, can you give them insider access to something that a normal consumer would not? I think when we work with a lot of brands, they have their first attempt to get great content in front of people who are influential is they'll take stuff that's on the web, their consumer piece, and like, well, here, give them this. And you have to help them understand, and sometimes we'll even have people sit in focus groups. I mean, the people that are really credible recommenders in a category love this stuff. They're the people who call the 800 number to get the additional specs about what's going to be, you know, this nuance between 4 products, and they want to know that. They want to get in the nitty-gritty. They want to have a clear understanding about what makes your product different. And for you as a company, that's great, because they're going to have a better, credible recommendation the more information you give them. Power tends to be this idea that unlike status, you're connecting their feedback to something that will be visible. So a good example is companies like Life is Good, where they said, hey, your opinion matters, and we're going to use that to help make our product, right? Helping to feel like they're impacting the company. And of course, stuff. And stuff, you know, may feel like a low term here, but it's the idea of like, could you seed product with them? And that's, we're a big fan of that. First-hand experience drives 83% of word-of-mouth recommendations. So it's incredibly important. We favor that over, hey, send them a tchotchke or a t-shirt or a coupon. Give them something that's going to help that recommendation at the end of the day. And so you can see here it is a different conversation. This is very different than influencer marketing. Hey, I got a sponsored tweet from this blogger, and therefore this is what is driving the company. This is a longer-term investment, and we think the benefits for brand really do pay out. So to give you a couple examples of people that we think are doing a good job with this, I tried to stay neutral, so I picked one that is not a customer and then picked one that is a customer to give you kind of 2 different flavors. Lululemon has a great program, and they early on were not focused on any high-priced celebrities. Instead, what they did was figure out the micro-influencers in both their category, yoga, and in their region. So they would find yoga instructors and trainers in an area where their store was going to be opening, and they would make those individuals basically heroes within the store. They would have imagery of them. That person would get special discount. And the cost, obviously, is much more minimal. I mean, you weren't paying these individuals large stipends or paid for opinion, but they had these people trying the product. These people clearly were influencing the people that were in that area. And in the end, they were able to have, as anyone could argue, tremendous success in winning over opinion leaders region by region everywhere where they opened up. And the other thing that's interesting, this was not hundreds of thousands of individuals. This is the numbers I've seen have only been a couple hundred total in the program. So it's an example where reach, again, is not really the idea. And it isn't necessarily about buying the opinion, but how can you create a more authentic relationship and give those people benefits back in terms of investing with your brand. So let's switch gears and I'll talk about one that's more from the consumer electronics industry. Our company tends to, I think I may have mentioned this, work in a number of verticals: housewares, consumer electronics, outerwear, sporting goods, automotive, beauty. And so I try and find ones that kind of branch the broadest. Consumer electronics is a good example. And I think what they're doing here was one of the more interesting case studies. So what's interesting about GoPro is in their model, everyone that has a GoPro, they view as working on behalf of their marketing department, right? Everyone who has a GoPro is capable of creating content and sharing that content. And that act became their virtuous cycle. The people would see that content, they'd want to buy more GoPros, those people would create more content, and it just became a way for the company to grow organically and obviously become a global dominant brand. They worked with us because getting content to actually go live after someone had purchased was an area that they weren't seeing as much traction. So they're like, we know that at the point of sale, that's the conversation and our buying journey that we care about influencing the most. And what we need them to do is focus more on making sure that they are not just selling the gear, but showing individuals how to actually share the content. So we worked with them to put together a group that was retail associates, their athletes, their distribution partners, and even their brand reps. We created content that was really a custom certification. You created content that was fun and interactive. You had to pass the information in order to get the certification, and the act of passing it unlocked some steep discounts on the product, so to allow that kind of first-hand experience to help them understand not only what they should be doing, but when they do it themselves. And they did a few tiers of the reward model. So stuff, which was the exclusive discounts, and contest rewards. They hit on status. They had rankings against their peers on knowledge performance. Certifications, if anyone could pass the information at 100%, they were given a different status. And over time, they created an army that was quite large. Over 100,000 individuals have been a part of this program. These individuals are spending about 5 to 10 minutes, even longer, with GoPro. And more importantly, these individuals are having over 40+ buying conversations every week. That's a minimum of 5 million offline word-of-mouth conversations about what to buy they're influencing. And for any brand, that is an incredibly exciting stat. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. I know that we will be posting both this webinar and can make this presentation available to anyone that would be interested. And then I think there's some time here at the end to answer questions.
Hello?
Hi, were there any questions?
Oh, yes. We do have a few questions here. And the first question is, you covered a bunch of information regarding the consumer buying journey on slide 12. Can you touch on that a little again, please?
Yeah, let me go back to that slide. There's a lot of information in this slide. And the thing that I would just point out is what it's saying, and not to get caught up too much in the numbers, is the fact that your advertising that you're doing right now is obviously having an impact on consumers, right? That's what they're going to start their buying journey on. So part that we really talk to marketers about is it's great to have the awareness, but clearly as people move closer to the actual purchase, they may buy a competitor if you're not thinking about how do I align so that the conversations that they're having where they're looking for online reviews, they're reaching out to their friends or family, or they're asking for advice at retail, but you haven't figured out how to add that to your mix. And that's really what you're seeing here, the 67% of advertising driving a lot of awareness for you in the category, but then obviously 22% of that final purchase being influenced by that ad that you spend a lot of money in is a stark reality for many marketers to figure out how do I add more elements or change my marketing mix, not to change dramatically what it is that I'm doing.
Okay, great. We have another question. Inga, you discussed moving past celebrity to everyday experts. Can you explain again the kind of expert brands should be engaging?
Yeah, we tend to think about it in a few different ways. Like I say, always start with your buying journey. Where is the consumer going to look for advice? We do think an influencer that you should take into account is the people who are selling your product, people at retail. Incredibly important group for you to be thinking about. Then the next more common group that we talk about is who is an aspirational figure, is a better term, in your category? Is it a chef? Is that person teaching the local cooking class? Is it the blogger or the local food critic? And then, of course, the third part that we often ask people to think about is not someone that is in retail or is aspirational, but can you identify people that are just incredibly passionate about the category? Obviously, they're going to be sought out in their peer network for their opinion. And for those individuals, they crave the same thing that the other individuals look for from a brand. Great insider knowledge about what products to have, great ways to connect with the brand. And those three, for us, are a great place to start, and then map that back again, as I said, into your buying journey to figure out at what point and what information should you be feeding them and how you can connect with them with your brand.
Perfect. We have another one, Inga. You mentioned Amazon. Don't I have to start there to try and influence reviews, since so many shoppers also start their active evaluations there?
Yeah, it is a good point. I think there was a great study, I want to say 2 weeks ago, talking about how many people start their online research, but not necessarily buying, on Amazon, that they do view it as a credible source for reviews. So if your product is one where you know that the online review is critical for purchase, it's not a bad strategy to add that element into your outreach. Now, it's tricky, right? Because like in the other channels, you can't go about it in an inauthentic way. You can't buy reviews. You can try and be a part of programs like Amazon's Vine program, where you can seed product to their top reviewers, and their reviewers are based on their credibility of information, their quality of the review that's happening. The other option is if you know that you've got a good group of consumers that have purchased from you, and they're your brand advocates, you can work with them and find where credible places they could talk about your product, such as reviews on your websites or Amazon. But I definitely, as most people on this phone knows, you don't want to cross the line in terms of paying for the review. That always comes back as something that you want to avoid, just because of that consumer trust. Once they find that, they're eroded on all the other sources of information that you're putting out there.
Thank you very much, Inga. We have another one. So how do you identify these everyday experts?
Yeah, it's different for every brand. What we find is we can work with the brand, and generally we can figure out, so let's take, for instance, what's a good neutral category for this group? Let's take beauty, for instance. We know, for instance, that people that are in cosmetology school are a great audience, so we'll figure out a recruitment tactic for that piece. We also know that many of the people who have purchased that brand's product, some subset of them are influencers. And so we can work with the brand to figure out how do you profile those individuals. What we've found is there is this hand raising that happens. And this happens across all the segments, that if you basically put information out there that only kind of an influencer might be interested in, those people self-select. We see this a lot in retail. We have studies that have shown that when you do like a brand certification program in retail, the people that will self-select, like, oh, I'm really interested in that particular category, those individuals turn out are just really passionate and good at their job, and what becomes exciting is they're now visible to you as a brand. And the data that we had, we did a study across 63,000 sales associates were in this study over 2 years. And an individual that would raise their hand and interact with the certification knowledge, on average, we're selling 87% more of that brand than their peers. And we haven't been able to replicate that same study always in the other peer groups, but it seems to make sense that that would really be a similar trend. And so if you can create a piece of content, maybe as a brand certification, you start pushing it out across your network or social or your partner social, the people that start selecting that's a great way to go back and identify them and figure out, profile them. Are you someone that is influential in the category and passionate about it? If so, let's talk about how to be closer with our brand.
Great. I believe that is all, Inga. That's all the questions that we do have. On behalf of IHA, I would like to thank you and Experticity once again for all your support and knowledge and all that you do. And for everyone who is on the webinar, feel free to go to www.housewares.org in the Knowledge Center, and you can watch and listen to the webinar. And also, Inga, do you have some info? Do you have anywhere where you would like people to contact you with additional questions?
Yeah, let me put up my contact information at the end here, which is my phone number, and that's the easiest way to get a hold of us. Or you can email me at inga.johnson@experticity.com.
Great. Well, thank you all again for attending Webinar Wednesday with IHA and Inga. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to contact Inga directly. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Bye.